Okay, well, we'll kick off, I guess, Liz, and there are people still streaming in, but we'll get started because we've got a lot of ground to cover. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the UniAdmissions Open Day. It's a bit unusual for us because normally we do these in the afternoon, but for the first time ever, we're doing this in the morning just to kind of see what the attendance and the reception is like. So if you like the new timing, then please let us know. We're going to be flicking through a huge amount of slides today, so we've got a lot of content packed for you. If we go too quick, or if you do have any questions, then please do pop in some questions into the chat or in the Q&A section. We'll do our absolute best to get through as many of them as possible. Introductions, I suppose. So my name is Rohan. I'm the founder of the company, and essentially I've been looking after our students and parents who essentially want to improve and maximize their chances over their competitors. What we do is we're essentially an Oxbridge prep school, and we work with students over extended periods of time. I also look after our books division, so we've published a lot of titles I'm sure you've seen. If you haven't already, just search UniAdmissions on Amazon, and we've got, well, I think we're getting close to 100 titles now, Liz. It's kind of hard to keep track of these things. And over to you now, Liz.
So hi everyone, my name's Liz. I'm an admissions consultant here at UniAdmissions. I help students by sort of consulting them on their options and telling them what kind of help we can offer them for our programs. And I actually applied to uni myself a couple of years ago, maybe 4 years ago that was. I went to UCL, and now I'm doing this wonderful job. So I'm very happy to be here, and hopefully this will be very, very useful for you guys.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Okay, well, we're gonna crack on. So this week is all about personal statements, and then next week, if you're looking to apply to PP in economics, particularly Oxbridge, then that's the talk for you. So today's going to be very, very general, but very actually kind of relevant for pretty much everyone applying to university. So I suppose we're going to kind of go through why do the universities have them, and there's been a lot made of them in the news recently. How do I write a good personal statement, and then kind of go through a few examples that our head of research Matt selected for us. So this is our way of kind of not taking any responsibility for the amount of content you're about to see, because Matt is as if you've been to some of our earlier open days, he's a bit aloof and he likes to challenge us presenters on these days. So Liz, just talk us through a little bit about why do universities have these? It's such a weird concept, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it seems a bit weird, I guess, for someone who's just coming from school, because you've never really been asked to write anything about yourself in that sort of manner. But I guess if you think about the UCAS application, it's very sort of numerical, and you don't really see a person behind those numbers often. So I think it's very important to sort of convey your passion in some sort of way. So I think that would be the main reason.
Yeah, and the important thing here is that everyone has to write one, so it kind of does standardize the process to a certain extent. And the key thing here is that it's meant to be all about not just you. It's not like a CV, because I suppose you could just submit a CV, right? Like they ask for a personal statement for a reason. It's because it's to do with you as an individual applying to that subject itself. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of when it was introduced, obviously it's been a while now, but the first major thing to say is you probably haven't written anything quite like this in the past. I mean, how did you find it because had you kind of done this kind of thing before?
Yeah, it was very hard actually, because I think people underestimate sort of how hard it is in a way, because you have to write a lot of things about yourself, but also they have to all be positive. So again, for some people it might be quite hard actually to praise yourself for like 4,000 characters straight. So but yeah, it's also just quite hard to find what to write at times, because you feel like you want to do the subject, but you can't really quite explain concisely why that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's quite tricky, I think.
And it's just unnatural, right? Because I think we're a very polite island generally. I think in Britain we're very polite. We don't actually like talking about ourselves too much. We're quite humble. We don't like bragging, and sometimes people think the personal statement is like your chance. You're almost expected to brag, which it just doesn't come naturally to well, to most adults, let alone 17-year-olds. So, so yeah, like there's obviously a word count, and we're just alluding to it, that it's 4,000 characters, including all spaces, punctuation, paragraphs, etc. So, and that's essentially your form won't be submitted. Like it literally won't let you submit. I remember fighting with this a long time ago. I don't know if you had this problem, but the form actually won't like literally submit if you have more than 4,000 characters. And so it is very much a hard limit. And like what kind of key things does it need to have?
I guess the most important thing is obviously why you want to study X subject. So very clear reasons as to kind of where your interest came from and what you want to do with it really at university. It really depends on where you're applying as well. So if you are going for Oxbridge, then it has to be very academic, and you have to make sure you kind of show that you're academically able to comment on your experiences and analyze your experiences. So those kind of things are definitely very important to include.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes sense. I suppose the other thing is that sometimes students kind of think of it as a just list of achievements, and they kind of keep talking about they start listing all the books they've read or all the sports they've done or all the musical instruments they played at grade 8, which sort of defeats the object of it. It's, as Liz said, it's very much about the subject and why you are right for the subject. But that's the key premise of the personal statement itself. So here's in true Matt Elliott fashion, he's created a wonderful poem for us. I'll let you, the viewers at home, have a look at it. Now, for complete clarity, we don't recommend you write a poem, even if you are applying for something like English as your course of study. We think it's a little bit too brazen and bold. So why to accept me? Let me count the ways. I do Duke of Edinburgh on Sundays. The first book I read captivated me. Man whose wife was a hat. How could it be? Have you read this book, Liz?
No, I haven't.
There's no reason why you would have. It's a psychology book, but for some reason it became superbly popular amongst the medical applicants, to the extent that it was almost a staple, that people worried that if you'd not read this, you wouldn't get into medical school. Thankfully that's changed. So then, after so much reading on the mind to apply for psychology, I was inclined. Some work experience I did in a lab, thanks to a scientist friend of my dad. And I think that, tongue in cheek, but this does demonstrate like a little bit about work experience, right? Which is the only subject you truly need work experience for, like is absolutely essential, is medicine. The other subjects it's useful to have, but it's by no means mandatory. So, and even for medicine right now, with the kind of COVID situation, hospitals won't let you anywhere near them. They're not even letting husbands into maternity units, so it's just not feasible. So please don't even bother with your time. It's not going to work. But in this, what do you think the universities think, Liz? Kind of, is it sensible to write that you use the family connection to get work experience?
I don't think that would be the best idea. I don't think you really need to kind of indicate where you got it from. No one's really interested in that.
I suppose it shows some resourcefulness, but it depends like how involved it was. So we generally recommend against it. I'm studying A levels, have great GCSEs, not to mention music, piano, and music theories. For my EPQ, I study postnatal depression to make a reader a lovely impression. I do have to ask, admire Matt's creativity with this. So this is a fair point, which is actually that there's a little bit of kind of stating the obvious here, and a little bit of repetition. So A levels and GCSEs, well, your UCAS form is going to tell the universities that, so there's just no point telling them. And again, the piano, musical theories, it's all great, but it does need to link in to why it's relevant for your subject to a certain extent. Now, what I'm not suggesting is, which is, I'm sure you've seen these types of statements, Liz, where they say, I'm very talented at piano and therefore I'm going to be a great surgeon because piano allows me to be very manually dexterous. No, that's too far a stretch. But for instance, you can say, I'm able to do all of these things, manage my time well, which is going to put me in a great stead for a challenging degree at university, for instance. And in so few characters, it's hard to do justice to how great I am. My offer is a must. So now we move on to the normality section of the personal statement, which is the actual structure. And we kind of tend to break this down into the introduction, the academic ability, a little bit for the extracurriculars, and then finally the conclusion. So often when I ask for students to kind of write a first draft, this is typically the format that they'll submit. So there'll be a teeny tiny introduction, about a paragraph on why they're good for the subject, decent amount for hobbies and interests, and then a huge amount for skills, and they'll kind of wrap up with a few lines. I mean, I don't know about you, Liz, but this is principally what mine looked like right at the start. My very first draft was probably not very far from this, actually, on reflection.
Yeah, I think kind of the same, yeah. That's how it all starts, I think, yeah.
It is, isn't it? And that's like a really natural thing to do. But actually, what the universities kind of want to see is slightly different. So obviously the introduction stage, but the majority of the bulk of the body has to be suitability of the subject rather than and everything else, the hobby, skills, interest, kind of comes in towards the end, just to support and just to show that you're a rounded individual. Not that Oxford and Cambridge care too much about that. And then finally finishing off with the conclusion itself. So before we kind of go into personal statements and kind of the nitty-gritty, I suppose it's probably worth talking a little bit about the importance of personal statements. So if you're applying, Liz, if we're applying for, say, Russell Group universities that don't have the admissions tests or interviews, I think it's fair to say if the personal statement is pretty important, because that's like one of the main things they'll distinguish. But what about if someone's applying to Oxbridge? Is it still as equally as important?
So, I mean, I don't think it's as important as most people think it is. You know, it counts for about maybe 5 to 10% of the application. So comparing to things like, you know, the admissions tests and the interviews, which are about 30% each, it really usually doesn't make a difference, and it probably won't determine if you get an offer or not in the end.
Yeah, we actually had if you come to one of our later open days, we actually went to all of the Cambridge and Oxford open days and kind of recorded segments that we thought would be useful for our audience. And actually there's a clip, I don't know if you've seen it, Liz, it's from an English admissions tutor at Oxford. He says we've literally never accepted anyone purely on their personal statement, but more importantly, we've never rejected anyone on their personal statement. And then he kind of talks later in the segments about, actually, no, there was one person who we rejected, but the stuff they said was so horrendous, there was no way we could have interviewed them. So unless you're extremely controversial, the personal statement, as you said, is never going to be a make or break. But I think, you know, it's one of these things that in my experience, students are really obsessed about. So like and to a certain extent, I was guilty of this when I applied, where I just kind of went through, I think I did like 10 redrafts, and I'm pretty sure it's just punctuation that was changing towards the end of those latter redrafts. Whereas that time would have been much better spent on the admissions test and the interview prep as well. Yeah,
definitely.
Okay, well, we've got a few cliches. This is kind of like one of my favorite slides, which is shows essentially how easy it is to not stand out by kind of following the crowd. So the numbers on the right in brackets show that the number of times this phrase was used in a UCAS statement. I think this is from a few years ago now, but the pattern's not really changed. And you can see how easy it is to fall and essentially, you know, make some fairly generic claims. So the whole point of the personal statement, it is the key is in the first word, which is personal rather than a generic statement. So, you know, really make an effort to make yours unique and really about you. Saying things like I've wanted to do medicine since I was a fetus probably isn't going to be the way to make yourself stand out. Great. So other things, Liz, what do you think about this one? I mean, would you be impressed with this as an admissions tutor?
I mean, it's kind of like a bit, maybe slightly generic. I would say you could, there's probably something more specific that made the student kind of, you know, think about doing medicine, some kind of experience that he's had previously. So yeah, I would say it could be improved definitely by doing something more kind of specific.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess like the first line, you may be thinking to yourself at this moment, why medicine? Well, from an early, I think that's just, it's a bit too colloquial, and actually the rhetorical questions don't tend to work well in prose generally. So we tend to say avoid the questions as well. Here's a little bit about flattery. So this is, I think this, you know, it potentially could come across sincere, but the fact is your personal statement is going to be sent to all the five universities that you apply to. So I mean, it's obviously fair to say that all 5 could be world-renowned universities, but it just comes across a little bit disingenuous, essentially, doesn't it? Yeah. What do you think about this bit? Because I get some mixed messages when I'm talking to students about this. Some are very keen about saying, I'm studying these 3 A levels and maths has given me the ability to think reasonably.
I mean, there's no point really mentioning what you study again, as you said previously. If you have it on your UCAS form, you don't have to kind of, list the A levels that you're doing. You can do it if you're trying to kind of, add something that you haven't stated before, but also kind of tie into your interest about the subject. So very specifically, maybe there were some sections that, really motivated you to go into, say, medicine or whatever you want to do. So in that case, it could help, but, it has to be, it has to all tie in to kind of prove a point that you're good for the subject.
Yeah, exactly. I think just saying that I have learned these skills from my A levels is fairly generic, and it's almost implied, isn't it? I mean, it's obvious that if you've done English, you're going to be more verbose than someone who's done a computer sciences degree, for instance. Computer science at A level. And then there are things that we kind of say you should not cover in the personal statement. So things like harsh criticism. So essentially talking and really blaming about any bad teachers, any kind of bad schools, bad work experience. It's really not the place to say. Like, criticism can be easily misinterpreted in the personal statement. Don't name drop. I reviewed this one personal statement a couple of years ago when the chap was like, my father is the emeritus professor of X subject at Cambridge. I was like, no, that's good. That's actually going to work against you. It's personal, not about your family connections. Things that happened before GCSE. I suppose, Liz, is there anything you can think? I mean, nothing comes to mind immediately that would be worth talking about before GCSE, unless it was something that influenced your desire to study that subject. But if I saw a statement which said, in year 6 I was corridor monitor or something, that probably would raise a few questions, right?
Yeah, I think unless it's like a huge achievement that no one else has, like I don't know, you competed at some really cool world championship or whatever.
Yeah, really true.
Like, there's no point really saying what you did.
Yeah, unless you like in the Olympics or like the biologic championship, worldwide championships for under 11s. Attenuating circumstances. So we tend to say this needs to go into your school reference, essentially. So if someone was unwell, you didn't perform as well in your exams, that's the place to put these in. Please mention university names, because this is going to go out to all 5 of your choices. And then just kind of avoid things that aren't true for all courses. So for instance, if you're applying for something like Cambridge Natural Sciences, if you then say, I look forward to doing a broad degree consisting of both biology and chemistry, and then you end up applying for biology at Bristol, for instance, that's not going to come across as a genuine application at that point. So keep it generic enough. Remember, the other thing I suppose is worth talking about, Liz, is Cambridge have this SAQ form, so it allows the applicant to essentially write another personal statement if they're not already fed up of writing one for the UCAS form.
Yeah, it's very good that Cambridge does it because Oxford doesn't. So with Oxford, you kind of have to just go with what you've written in the UCAS, which is quite a shame, I think, because they are quite different, their programs, comparing to others.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I applied to Cambridge. Okay, so I've got a question for you, Liz. I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. Let's say someone's applying to Oxford or Cambridge, and actually they've just had a really busy year, and they say, well, how accurate do I have to be? Like, I'm planning on reading these books. I've not read them yet. I'm pretty sure I'll read them before the interview, or I got a silver in my DV, but I really should have been a gold. Like, kind of just say I got gold. Like, what would your advice be to them?
So rule number 1, just don't lie essentially in a personal statement. So obviously, if you're sure that you will be able to read those books, although I advise you not to kind of overestimate your abilities, especially in year 13. So it's better to always mention sort of the things that you've already done and that you don't have to come back to too much sort of before the interview, because those things, I mean, they'll easily come up in the interview. My first question, I think, was about a book I read, definitely.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it makes a really bad impression if that first question goes just you can't answer it. Like it's the easiest one you'll get probably in the interview, and you just go blank because you don't know. So
yeah, I had a friend when I was applying. He applied for biology at Oxford,
yeah.
and he kind of made a big deal of all the reading he'd done, including one of the books which was called The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins.
Mm-hmm.
And then, lo and behold, his interview actually ended up being Richard Dawkins, and they spent essentially most of the interview on that book, which he hadn't read it.
That's a disaster, man.
But that's the thing, right? Like, because obviously you're reading publications which have done well for academically, because they're the ones that essentially end up in mainstream. So, and if you are applying to top tier universities, essentially, if you're applying to Oxford, you will have an interview.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reasonable chance that if you're applying, you're going to be interviewed by someone who studied your subjects at a very high level, is a leading expert in it, and probably has read the books that you're referring to. So it may well come up. So yeah, it's just not worth it at all. We actually talk about this in the Two Blues podcast. Obviously for Oxford it's fairly cut and clear. For medicine, it's equally cut and clear, which is if you start off your medical career lying, then you're not going to last long in the medical career.
Yeah.
But if you're applying for, say, a university which doesn't require a test or an interview, it's just purely based on the personal statement, some could make the logical argument, actually, it doesn't matter, just say what you need to get the place. But Will and I talk about the fact that essentially it's not just all about getting in, because even if you get in and you don't, air quotes, deserve that place, then you'll have a miserable time at university. So just be truthful to yourself, don't. So this is broadly what the process looks like, which is you kind of write the personal statement, kind of review it, then kind of think more, and then kind of keep going. So very rarely will you write a personal statement and it'll be done, dusted within the first one or two drafts. Typically it takes several. The number it takes depends on essentially how much of a perfectionist the student is, I think.
Yeah.
Generally, if you're kind of ending up doing 7 or 8, that tends to be majority. Students should be happy by that point. Mm-hmm. If you get into double digits, you're probably spending far too long on it. Okay, so as we said, here's a quick section from our program guide to kind of just go through the structure of the kind of statement. As we said, the majority is the academics, and then a little bit on the extracurriculars. Mm-hmm. Fine. Okay. So I think, oops. Ooh, fancy transitions. So Liz, what distinguishes a good statement from a great statement?
I think definitely a clear answer to the question why you want to study X subject. So very kind of clear, concise way of putting it. Also, originality in a way. So don't mention the same things that everyone is mentioning. I think some things, some books are just kind of they repeat all over and over again every year for the same subject, and the tutors are kind of sick of it at the end. So and also very clear writing, concise and to the point really. And finally, I think definitely some kind of personality, again, originality, some kind of personal twist on it to kind of see who you are really through the statement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they just need that. They need to know it's a human writing it rather than a generic kind of person who's just kind of writing what they need to. So yeah, really make it personal, and really talk about why it's you're right, but also the subject is right for you. So we're going to go through a quick exercise now, and this is a chance for everyone in the chat to really come alive. So we'd love some feedback from you as to what you think is a good and not a good personal statement. So for this one, for me, medicine offers an academically and mentally challenging profession which amalgamates my fascination with the human body and my desire to work with a variety of individuals with their own individual problems on a day-to-day basis. It offers a chance to make a real difference in the lives of others. So, audience, what do you think? Good personal statement, bad personal statement? Any questions? We're going to go through a few of these. So I'll just wait for a few comments to kind of come in before we kind of proceed further. While we're waiting, Liz, what are your thoughts?
I think this could be a decent introduction if this just is the first sentence, but it definitely needs to go kind of more into the detail later on and sort of explain a bit more deeply.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's decent, isn't it? That first sentence is pretty heavy though, isn't it? Like it probably feels like they need to have a few more.
The words, I think, yeah, like you don't really need to use any fancy, I think, words at all. That's actually something we didn't say before, but you can just keep it simple and just make it, understandable to everyone.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I probably would have removed the fact that they talk about individuals like twice. This should probably be, that first sentence should probably be split into two realistically. But I think yes, it's a solid opening. It's slightly generic, if I'm honest, but ultimately it's not like super generic. Like I think it's acceptable, and again, to a certain extent, that's what we're going for, right? Like you don't want to be super controversial in an effort to be unique. You just want to be safe and not generic. Okay, good. Keep them coming. Keep comments coming, everyone. So thank you. So in the summer of 2008, my grandfather was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. At the tender age of 11, I was oblivious to neurological disorders implications. On Saturday afternoon that summer, my father suddenly collapsed and I had a seizure in the cold food sections of the supermarket. I've never been as terrified as I was when I watched froth come out of his mouth. Wow.
Yeah.
That could easily be a movie.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's very personal and very sort of, leaves an impression. I think someone would remember this one, but yeah, not sure if it has to go in all those details, to be honest. Like I think it would be enough to just mention, that this thing happened. You don't have to really go into all the I mean, I'm not sure what medics prefer, to be honest. I'm not really.
I think it depends to a certain extent, depends on the individual, and the success of this statement would really be on what came next. So I think this is okay, but there's obviously, I think you and I both agree we would remember this chapter, like whoever it is. It goes into a huge amount of detail. It paints a very vivid picture, but it doesn't answer the question why medicine. I mean, it hints to it that it's likely because of his dad. But now, what may have happened is his dad went into hospital. The kind of applicants saw the level of care taken by medics, and therefore that inspired him to do. I think that'd be an amazing story. And what I often tell students is, particularly when they're applying for interviews, when they've got their interview coming up and they're preparing, is their answers do have to come out and sound like essentially like a very short film that someone could talk about, rather than kind of just something really generic. So I actually like this one quite a bit. I think they've done a good job. They just need to make sure that it doesn't get too emotive. So I think the word, some things like at the tender age of 11, I think is probably a little bit too kind of emotive unnecessarily. So they could probably just say, at 11, I was oblivious, and so on. Just takes some of the emotion out of it. But yeah, I think it has potential. Here we go. Okay, so we've got reading the book Eve Estranged by Helena Kennedy has also been fascinating, as I've started thinking about which issues have never been considered, how law might be affected by gender. This is your turf. Since watching 2 documentaries about jails in Miami, Florida, I've also become interested in the differences between British and American legal systems.
Yeah, I mean, I've read this book, so I guess, I mean, there's a lot more to say, I think, on that. You really have to expand on exactly kind of what issues particularly interested you, and sort of kind of analyze it a bit further. And I think it sounds a bit like you're listing things here. So essentially, you just go from one book to like another completely different topic, essentially. So it's a bit, not deep enough, I think.
Yeah. And I suppose that brings an interesting point, right? Like, because if you're one of these rock star applicants who has done a huge amount, like a lot of Oxford applicants will be, how do you like kind of retain focus? Do you kind of sacrifice breadth for depth? Is it better to kind of talk about one thing a lot, or just to kind of list everything?
Yeah, I had to, actually, my first draft, I think, was about 4 pages long, because I wrote so much on different things, and I just had to, get rid of some of them, depending on, I guess, like what the courses prefer. So you kind of just look through the syllabus, you look kind of what topics you would be studying, and you try and tailor what you're writing to those topics. But yeah, you definitely have to get rid of some of the things, unfortunately, just because, it's quite short. Yeah.
And I guess it's just, there's ways to save space, right? So like, if you don't talk about things like GCSE and A-level, because this is the kind of stuff that's really going to set you apart. So in your view, Liz, you would have probably talked a little bit about that first point and expanded on it rather than just listing everything. Yeah, I can buy into that. Okay, well, here's something that probably neither of us are particularly specialists in. Many of Plato's proposed solutions to these flaws undermined what are viewed today as personal rights. This led me to reflect on how laws protect us and also the intricacies create a doctrine to which people adhere, both complying and incorporating it into morality. Investigating Plato's ideal political system, I consider the contrast between how his laws are devised and their status in our own society. Plato's guardians, not unlike our own judiciary, relied to both codify and interpret the law. While their decisions were considered to be benevolent, society was expected to conform to laws dictated by a separate class. So, audience, if any of you are applying for what I assume this is philosophy or politics, then please do give us your insights. Liz, what do you think?
It's very academic, which is good. I mean, it kind of sounds like an essay more than a personal.
Yeah, I was going to say that. It feels like it's almost like a submission for a dissertation, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, probably I don't know where it goes further from here, but you should probably kind of add some personal things in here as well, and kind of make sure that it ties into why you actually want to do this. So make it more of like a personal statement. Yeah,
Gavin Sharker shows a solid understanding of the subject. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Like they clearly know what they're talking about. But what I think I worry about with some of these style of personal statements is, unfortunately, the people who are reading these know significantly more about the subject than you currently do, and probably ever will, in the vast majority of cases. So there is a risk that if we start saying things like this, that they'll just say, well, yeah, obviously, I know that. So it's essentially teaching a professor, which is kind of the wrong thing to do. So there's a decent amount of reflection on here. But I think it probably could be made slightly, as you said, Liz, just slightly more personal and showing what the motivation is. But otherwise, I mean, it comes across well. Okay, here's an easier one. Outside my studies, I have many interests, with tennis being my favorite sport. I'm a keen golfer, rugby player, and cricketer. I find endurance events to be a good test of my self-will, so I often compete in biathlons and ran a 20-mile race for charity.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could mention that, maybe not as much detail. You don't have to include all the different sports you play. Just mentioning kind of that last one would be enough, I think.
Yeah. The other thing here is obviously we're assuming this is towards the end of the personal statement, but the other thing is it doesn't say to what level any of these sports are played. It just says I'm interested in or I play these. But I mean, I can potentially play ice hockey. I mean, I never have, but I'm sure I could attempt it, but I probably wouldn't be very good at it. And I think whereas it's a difference to say I play cricket to a county level and I was won championships, for instance, in tennis, for instance. And there's no real, as Jad is saying, there's no link back to the course. So, I mean, we don't know what course this person's applying to, but if it was something like medicine or law, it wouldn't be that difficult to kind of talk about the time pressures involved, and the fact that because I can manage my time, I should be able to have equally manage a difficult, demanding degree at university, for instance. So this feels more like a list, I guess, is what we're saying, rather than kind of going into depth. Yeah. How many have we got? Oh, we've got 3 more. Okay. So music has colored my historical studies. For example, I played oh my goodness. Do you want to attempt that word?
Shostakovich, his name is.
Symphonies coinciding with my study of Stalinist Russia, GCSE, each with a very different feel depending on his relationship with Stalin. But perhaps most moving was playing his 10th symphony. Purely self-indulgent expression of relief after the death of the dictator. It's impossible to appreciate this great work without its historical context, which transforms a piece into something personal, attaching the listener emotion.
Oh, very deep.
They are, yeah. I mean, they clearly like this piece of music, don't they? Again, though, it's all great. They clearly understand the subject matter, but I'm not seeing a kind of personal relationship. It feels more like an analysis of that piece of music than their kind of motivations for the subject.
Yeah, I agree.
And you can see how easy it is to do, right? I mean, we've picked these examples from real personal statements, or I assume Matt has. So the idea is that it's easy to kind of end up talking about something that you're passionate about, but actually doesn't add to your application. Just, what I want to do is actually listen to this 10th symphony now rather than meet this applicant, which is kind of almost the opposite of what you want to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. I'm an active member of the school community, playing first 11 football and being school prefect. I'm on the committee of the school's economic society, where I invite and have the opportunity to discuss with influential professionals in their respective fields. Okay, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess again, you should probably talk a bit more about kind of what that taught you, or like what kind of skills, or like what kind of connection to the subject it has as well. So it's a bit sort of detached, I think, from the main message.
Yeah, I guess, I don't know if you did this in English GCSE, but I was always told like state, quote, comment.
Yeah.
And I kind of almost think personal statements are a little bit like that. So instead of state, you state, you evidence, and then you kind of reflect. So you kind of say something like, I'm an active member of the school community, playing first 11 football. This has taught me how to manage my time, or this has taught me how to work well in a team society, and therefore I believe I'll be well suited to this degree, etc. So it's always tying everything back to the degree itself. So it's good that it kind of goes into a little bit more detail about, first 11 team. He's very involved, but it's just taking it to the next level. Right, last one. With a genuine zeal for the subject and an ability to relate to my studies in the real world, I'm convinced I will thoroughly thrive at a degree level economics. Okay. Yeah, I feel like this is probably the conclusion to a statement.
Yeah, probably. I mean, depending on what they wrote before, it's quite hard. I think this one sentence, yeah.
As a closing though, I think it's fine, right? Like there's nothing.
Yeah.
That kind of,
yeah. If they expanded on it before, then that should be okay.
Yeah, and ideally what we say is if you can somehow find a link or a motif that goes through your personal statement, then you can kind of link back to that at the end. So like if you introduce something, like for instance, as Jad says, you could have made it more memorable. So if this was a statement about, if we continued from the chap whose father was frothing at the mouth, then if you still could find a way of linking back to his father at the end, I think that would have really bookended it quite nicely. But yeah, like it's fine. Okay, well, that's kind of the personal statement analysis done. Of course, we've got hundreds of these in one of our textbooks, with a lot more detail. So Liz, tell us a little bit about the SAQ. We've kind of alluded to it briefly, but just what is
it? So the SAQ is basically another personal statement that you have to write specifically for Cambridge. So if you're applying for Cambridge as one of your choices, you will have to write a separate personal statement for that, which is, it could benefit you, or it could do the opposite, depending on how you kind of use that opportunity. But generally, so it's just a very good chance to kind of tailor it more to the course at Cambridge, and make sure you really show that you want to go to Cambridge over sort of other places, and make sure it's a bit kind of more, I guess, like aligned to what to the teaching at Cambridge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a chance to kind of essentially tell them why Cambridge rather than just why the course. Particular. So it is more work, and people often get frustrated saying, why is Cambridge making me jump through so many hoops? But actually it's definitely, it works in your favor if you do it properly. So and you can't just leave it completely blank. There's about, I think, 20, 30 fields that you have to fill in, one of which is the personal statement. The others are kind of more admin things. But yeah, it's definitely worth taking advantage of it. So I guess that kind of brings us over to the kind of the segment where we kind of talk a little bit about how we can help students. In fairness, personal statement, most schools tend to be decent at personal statements in the UK, internationally less so. So the majority of our work is actually worked on the test and interview, but we do obviously look after the personal statement from start to finish. We're going to be taking questions at the end of this segment. So please if you do have questions, we'll do our best to kind of get through as many of them as possible. But for now, Liz, just talk us through a little bit about how we can help students.
Yeah, so all our students normally are enrolled on very kind of structured programs that cover all the different elements of the application. So as Rowan said, that would be usually the personal statement, but also the admissions tests and interviews, perhaps, if you're applying to medical school at Oxbridge. And our programs consist of sort of four main types of support. So you can move on to the next slide with a one-to-one tuition then. If yeah, so the first part would be the one-to-one tuition. So normally our students will be working with a tutor who is a senior student or a graduate in their subject at university. And they've also scored a sort of the top 10% nationally in the admissions test. So they're real experts in their subject. And what these tutors do is essentially they prepare you for all the different components. Again, they look through the personal statement with you, they prepare you for the tests, the interviews, and the sessions with them would be very much tailored to the student themselves. The second part of the support would be the comprehensive materials that we offer. Oh no, actually there's something else before that. But
this is just the lesson report that the students get.
Oh, right, yeah, after each session with the tutor, you will get very detailed lesson reports. So this is kind of how it will look like, and it will sort of outline the things that you need to work on and sort of any homework that you need to do. Yeah, so the second part would be the resources. So we have a huge sort of bank of resources. We've published many books, as Ronan has said, on the personal statement, but also on various different exams and interviews. And we also have a very comprehensive online portal with a lot of past questions and resources to help you and work on your own. So that's the second part. The third element of the programme would be the enrichment seminars, and these take place every week on a Sunday. So basically it's a group of students together with a tutor again, debating university level topics. So this will really help with sort of deepening your motivation, understanding more about your subject, and giving you that insight for your interview to make sure that you stand out from the crowd and sort of answer these questions at a deeper level. So that's the third part. And the fourth part, the final part, are the day courses, or the intensive courses as we call them. These run towards sort of the end of the year. So these focus on the different components of the application. So there'll usually be one in the personal statement, one on the interview, and one on the admissions test that you're taking. And these courses basically aim at kind of consolidating everything you've done with your tutor on your own and in the seminars, and making sure that each part of the application is fully ready to be sent off. And you generally feel much more confident after attending one of these. So that's kind of the final part of the program. And yeah, all of that kind of leads on to us having really high success rates. So usually comparing to the national average, which is 20%, we have about a 61% over a success rate over the last 2-3 years. So we essentially triple your chances of getting an offer from Oxford, Cambridge.
Yeah, and I guess the important thing here is that it's not a magic bullet, right? It's like it's a huge amount of work for the students. Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons we get such a high success rate is because we're quite picky with the students we work with, but then when we do pick them, we expect them to kind of do a fair amount of work. So all of this stuff here, I mean, they're looking at what, 250 hours kind of over the course of the year. So it's a serious chunk. But and here's a quick slide that actually shows, if you compare our success rate, 60+%, the acceptance rates, the far right column, and this is for the top 25 schools in getting kids into Oxford over the last two in 2020. You can see actually we do better than pretty much most of the top schools, including places that you might think are actually much better, like Eton and Westminster and Harrow and Winchester, for instance.
Yeah.
Cool. So Liz, what's our ideal student like?
Yeah, so I mean, definitely when when we accept students on our programs, we look for attitude over everything. So it's very important that the student really knows why they want to do it and is very motivated to actually succeed in their application, and is willing to put in the hours as well. As Rowan said, it's quite intensive work. So yeah, it's definitely more about passion. I mean, it's also about ability, of course, but passion is always valued over academic ability. So we would rather accept a motivated student with lower grades over kind of a lazy student with high grades.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing with this is it's just a student honor code, right? So it's our way of kind of making sure that students, when they sign up with us, they're actually essentially signing up and actually committing to working hard. And so making sure they're turning up to time on their lessons, kind of communicating with their tutor regularly, So, essentially our tutors then have the time to focus on teaching, not just on the paperwork or the email, kind of the admin side of things. People like us quite a lot. You can have a look at some of our great reviews online on Trustpilot, various other platforms as well. If you found this useful, then please do leave us a quick comment on there. And Liz, what's this cooling off period about?
Yeah, so actually the first 2 weeks of our programs are all kind of trial weeks. So we have the opportunity to trial the student and make sure, they're attending and they're doing their homework, but also the student has an opportunity to trial the program as well. And if, either parties, either us or them are not happy, then both of them have the opportunity to kind of withdraw before the third week starts. So that really ensures that, it's a good match between everybody, the student, the program, and everyone is happy with what they're getting. And that's how also that kind of guarantees the high success rates as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Fab. And then the final thing, which is quite close to our heart, is our UniAdmissions Foundation. So we want to help students regardless of their financial status, as long as they're keen, committed, and dedicated to getting into Oxbridge or medical school. Essentially what we do is we help students from underprivileged backgrounds who don't have the financial means to support themselves. We help them completely for free. So we use our commercial students' revenues to subsidize them. Last year we helped, actually I think it was close to 200. Next year we'd like to hit a 1-to-1. So for every one paying client, we have another completely for free. And our target for this year is closer to about 300-400 students. So typically the foundation entrance is typically capped by not the number of places we have, but the number of people that apply. So if you think money is going to be an issue, well, don't let it be, and then just come speak to us, because we will be able to help you in some way. Here's a shameless plug by me, which is Will and I, our old head of consulting, is now currently on study leave doing a master's, and we've started a podcast up. So we talk a lot about things like personal statements, admissions tests, and so on. We talk about Two Blues. So that's on the Two Blues podcast, which we're into the 20th episode now, Liz. So if you've not joined, Liz, I'm going to be very disappointed.
I haven't actually, but I promise I will after this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll hold you to that. And so this kind of brings us nicely onto our Q&A segment. So this little video, we're going to leave this up and running. And I'll just show you an easy way of booking a consultation with us. So if you just go to uniadmissions.co.uk and then go into the book your consultation now button at the bottom left, that's the easiest way. So now's the time for us to be answering any questions. So please do keep them coming in, and we'll go through them as we can. So over to you, Liz.
Yeah, there's only one question here for now. So someone asked, how important are grades, I guess, for applying to Oxbridge? Yeah,
I suppose it depends which grades you're talking about. If it's GCSEs, then historically they've actually been pretty important, 30%. Recent intelligence suggests actually Oxford and Cambridge care less about them in, well, essentially the last year or two, because of the way the exams were done and a huge amount of grade inflation that took place. What that means is, in reality, the tests and the interviews are more important than they've ever been. The grades are, of course, still, it makes sure you get obviously 2 A stars, 3 A stars at A level, but the GCSEs will be less important than they've been historically.
Okay. Jad is asking, is it too late to start with working with UniAdmissions? The answer is no. It's never late.
Yeah, it depends on exactly what you're looking to achieve, but yeah, the answer is no. We like to work with students over a 12-month period. So ideally we would have started working with you in early Jan, assuming you're applying for this year. If you're applying for future entry, then of course it's a little bit later. But contact us, book in a consultation. We do take students right up until the summer, essentially for our full programs, and then enrollment does close for them. To a certain extent, it'll also depend on whether you have the time or your child has the time to be able to essentially work through our program and our syllabuses, essentially. Okay, well, any more questions, please do keep them coming in. Otherwise, we're obviously looking to run these on a weekly or fortnightly basis, and we appreciate those of you who attend these regularly. If there's a particular topic that you would like us to cover, so perhaps not just a subject, but particularly detailed topic, then please do mention it, and we'll do our best to kind of optimize and ensure that we go into a great deal of detail on that one instead. Liz, I've got a question for you here from Jad again. How do you help international students?
Yeah, so we help home students, international students, pretty much in the same way. We have the same programs for both categories, I guess. In that sense, there's not much of a difference, but obviously the program is very tailored to you, especially your one-to-one tuition. So if you have any specific sort of needs, then we can always cater for that.
Right. Yeah. So essentially, all of our teaching, 100% of it is done online. And here we go. Another one for you. Which books would you recommend related to law as a course?
I mean, it depends on kind of what sort of law you're interested in, because I think when I was applying, I was mostly interested in things like, international law, military law, and I read Anatomy of the Nuremberg Trials by Taylor. That was like my favorite book, I think, when I applied. I mean, to recommend these sort of things, I think you have to have a genuine interest in that particular field. It's not a good idea to kind of, put a book that someone else liked, but you have completely zero interest in, because law is so broad, and you might like, I don't know, commercial law more, and then you'd want to list your own books. So we do definitely have many resources that our tutors give out to our students on our programs, so they will definitely be able to advise you on that, kind of more tailored to yourself. Yeah,
we've got our own reading lists that we make available to program students as well. Okay, brilliant. Well, if you do have any last minute questions, then please do put them in. Otherwise, we look forward to speaking with some of you through in some consultations. I think, Liz, you're taking a few today, aren't you?
Yeah, quite a few.
And then I think we're going to also be, I might be taking a few myself tomorrow. I like to dip my toe in every now and then. When's the right time to join UniAdmissions? I mean, how many months before term starts by anonymous attendee?
Right, so technically, as Rohan said, like the best time to join would be at least 12 months in advance of your application, so your interviews, if you're applying for Oxbridge or medical school. But generally speaking, you can join at any time. As long as your time, kind of your commitment, you're able to commit to a few hours a week at least. So there's no real right answer to this question. I think it depends on you.
Yeah, like ideally we want to work with you for a longer period of time, because it maximizes essentially your results, and therefore it makes us look better in the long term as well. It's a slightly selfish, but I think it's a win-win on that front. So we like to work with students for 12 months, ideally for much longer, but that's the kind of main premise behind it, is we get better success rates if students start with us a little bit earlier. So if you're applying for 2023 entry, then essentially what we'd say is, get in contact with us now. We'll be able to give you the best advice based on that, but generally the best time to start was, last month. The next best time to start is now. It's a bit like stocks, right? Like best time to invest was 10 years ago, but the next best time is now.
Yeah. Do you provide support sessions regarding the separate Oxbridge admissions tests?
Yes, much to our product team's grief, they have to administer, run, design, deliver 25, 30 of these admissions tests across the space of the year. So let's say you're applying for economics at Cambridge, you'll have 2 admissions tests on the ECAA, 2 admissions test courses on the ECAA, and then all the tutoring and the books and so on related to them. I think, Liz, we have more admissions test books than pretty much everyone else combined 3 times over. So I mean, I think we're on like 40 or 50 of these titles now. So it's crazy how much content we're able to put out, and it's just because we have just a huge bank of tutors and team who really know what they're doing. So yes, we have a lot of support. Fab. Okay. Any other final kind of comments, Liz, on the personal statement? I mean, I suppose mine would just be don't work too hard on it. Focus on the test and the interviews. Anything kind of from your side, any nuggets of wisdom?
I mean, definitely, don't overthink it. It's not that deep, hasn't it? It's not that serious, you know. It's just basically like an essay about yourself, and be honest, you know, show your real passion, and yeah, I mean, it should be fine. It really isn't something that you should sort of stress over for years or months.
Yeah, okay, well, we should probably start wrapping up now, so we're coming up to an hour. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and we look forward to speaking to some of you in our consultations this weekend. Otherwise, we wish you a very nice weekend and hope to see some of you in the future. Have a very, very nice weekend, and nice to see you too, Liz.
Yeah, likewise. Have a good weekend, everyone, and yeah, see you soon. Bye.